Super Mario 64 needs no introduction. I won't bore you with details on its legacy and historical impact, but I will say that I grew up with it as a kid and as an adult made attempts at speedrunning it. Yeah, if you didn't think I could get any nerdier, turns out at one point I had aspirations of being a professional speedrunner, showing off my MLG skills on twitch.tv and maybe even one day AGDQ? A boy can dream. I never got any good. My 16-star PB is a dismal 28 minutes and 30 seconds. Almost twice the world record at the moment. But I had a lot of fun. Most of the time. There's something about those controls and tricks that make it an extremely satisfying speed game. But if you're familiar with Mario 64 speedrunning, or hell, Mario 64 in general, you're probably aware of this stage, Dire Dire Docks, and its infamous lag. On this stage, the frame rate screeches to a crawl as you enter a large open area and approach Bowser's enormous submarine. With the exception of 0-star, all speedrun routes eventually have to play this stage in order to unlock Bowser in the Fire Sea. But the rapidly dropping frame rate here is very much not conducive to a game done quick. Oftentimes, speedrunners will use the camera controls to keep as much of the geometry off screen for as long as possible. This is called lag reduction and is a major strategy in Mario 64 speedrunning. For years, if not decades, this has been accepted as fact. Bowser's sub is just too big and too girthy for the N64 to draw consistently. But what if I told you it didn't have to be? Super Mario 64 was written in C, and C, like a lot of other languages, has to be compiled. Compiling is the process of taking human-readable code and converting it into the pure zeros and ones that a CPU can process. Yes, despite looking and often feeling fairly technical, especially if you're not familiar with it, C is very much designed for humans. A lot of the constructs in C, and in fact most programming languages, have no real relevance to the computer itself, it's just here to process zeros and ones. As a result, a compiler converting C into machine code can actually make a lot of optimizations along the way. Stuff that helps make the code manageable for us can be reduced in steps or stripped out entirely, since by that point we no longer need our feeble human minds to work with it. As long as the results are the same, the compiler is just finding ways to execute our instructions faster. Sounds good, right? Surely a multinational, wildly successful game company with decades of experience wouldn't forget to use any compiler optimizations at all, right? Okay, this sounds like a joke, right? Like, I bet they forgot the compiler optimizations on this game. Well, let me tell you. Does it look like I'm f***ing laughing? Yes, Nintendo somehow failed to use any compiler optimizations on Super Mario 64. How do we know this? Well, some smart, dedicated folks in the Mario 64 community actually went to the effort of creating an effectively perfect decompilation of Super Mario 64. That is manually translating Nintendo 64 machine code back into human-readable C code by hand. Yeah, it's pretty wild. But apparently it wasn't even just hand translating. They even ran the code through the same compiler Nintendo used for Mario 64 and tweaked their decompilation along the way to ensure it produced machine code identical to the finished game. Yeah, really. So for all intents and purposes, this is almost as good as if the code had just leaked from Nintendo themselves, just with less documentation and a lot of unknown variable names. But most importantly, we can know with certainty what went into making the finished Mario 64, and therefore we know that no compiler optimizations were used. Now, once again, this is a multinational company. Could there have been a good reason to intentionally not use these optimizations? It is true that some compiler optimization levels, like GCC's 03, have a reputation of producing unstable code, particularly in the 90s. 02, on the other hand, is considered quite safe. In fact, it's considered the highest truly safe optimization level that you can use. If we take the community-made decompilation, make a minor adjustment to compile with 02, what is the resulting game code like? The compile process produces a ROM file like any other that you can load into a garden variety N64 emulator. But an emulator would hardly be a fair performance test. What we need to do is run it on the real deal hardware, and thanks to flashcards like the EverDrive 64, we can do just that. I should mention that I'll be testing on a US NTSC model N64 and the Japanese version of Mario 64, which is the version most commonly used among speedrunners. I'll be comparing the original untouched ROM with the optimized build we just made, both running on the same EverDrive and the same SD card to try to keep things fair. Alright, here we go. We're loading it up! At first glance it won't seem very different since the game is actually locked at 30 FPS. Therefore, the game's not necessarily going to get faster, it's just going to be less slow, if that makes sense. So, to check it out, we'll need to visit some slow areas. And we'll start with the mother of all slow areas, Dire Docks. As I approached the Bowser sub, very much accustomed to seeing the frame rate rapidly start to drop, it was indeed remaining noticeably smooth. The difference is actually quite remarkable. Here's some comparisons. You can see that in almost every situation, the optimized version is noticeably smoother. You can feel a little slowed down still. I feel like it's probably still not running at a full 30 FPS, but it's definitely way better. Here's some more comparisons. This is the tower in Womp's Fortress. Some of the differences are admittedly hard to see just from watching, but trust me, you can definitely feel them while playing. How about Jolly Roger Bay, another slow water section? Here, even the optimized build did start to choke. It seems that semi-transparent surfaces like the water here or the light in the castle are major contributing factors to the slowdown. This is legit transparency, folks, which was fairly strenuous at the time. A lot of other games just used fast dithering patterns to fake it. I wonder if the CPU is somehow involved in drawing that transparency, since it would be the main component affected by compiler optimizations. That could easily be possible too, since both the CPU and GPU share the same memory on the N64, making it easy for the CPU to be involved in frame rendering. A notable example of this is the screen in Mario Kart 64. The frame is doubled using the CPU, and a lot of emulators struggle with this because computers usually don't share the same memory between the CPU and GPU. That could explain why the optimizations seem to help in these situations.
But hey, that's just a theory.
Very uneducated without any substantial evidence.
Theory.
So, yeah, I have no idea why Nintendo didn't use any optimizations. I guess it's possible it was just a mistake or they weren't aware. Up until that point, most of Nintendo's games would have been handwritten assembly, so maybe they were just unaware of the eccentricities of a C compiler. Some have wondered if the optimization introduces instability or some other change in the way the game works, but so far no one's found anything. People have even run the 120-star TAS on it with no problems at all, though I guess you could probably make a faster TAS for the optimized build. So, for all intents and purposes, so far at least, it seems the O2 build is just as stable and functional as the retail build. They could have had their reasons that we just don't know about, but you may have noticed earlier I didn't actually add O2 to the compiler flags. It was already there, but only for the PAL version. Yes, Nintendo did eventually use O2 on the PAL version, which pretty much dispels any possible explanation for them skipping the optimizations before, since they eventually ended up using them anyway. Theoretically, the PAL release would run faster if it wasn't already running 16.7% slower. Yeah. It's kind of insane to me that speedrunners had to make an entire strategy around the omission of a 2-letter compiler flag from Nintendo. Of course, it's worth saying this discovery doesn't actually help any speedrunners at all. Using a build like this would definitely disqualify you since it's a pretty clear unfair advantage. In that sense, the damage was already done over 20 years ago. Plus, EverDrives are generally not allowed when speedrunning Mario 64 because of the unpredictable speeds of SD cards, so even if you could convince everyone to switch, you'd have to somehow manufacture a consistent run of cartridges as well. So, that mostly relegates this to an interesting what-if scenario, and a cool, new, slightly different version for casual play. Naturally, I can't distribute any copyrighted Nintendo games or code, and unfortunately probably can't even provide instructions thanks to Nintendo's tendency of DMCAing tutorials for working with the decompiled code. All I can say is Google and ye shall find. Possibly the craziest part about this is not the fact that it happened, but that we know that it happened. This video owes a massive debt to the incredible people that put this decompilation together, And while I've been a little critical of Nintendo in this video, they of course deserve recognition for creating such a timeless classic that spawned one of the most dedicated fan bases around, even now, 24 years later and counting. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Subscribe to MattKC.